thank you very much for staying. This will be the last talk, and then we can all go home, or maybe to the hotel. Okay, we have a timer here. Good. So basically, when you look at some of the rollups out there, like Arbitrum, Optimism, ZK Sync, and some of the established ones, many of them are actually quite centralized. Many of them actually have issues. For example, if you have your sequencer in any of these rollups, if they go down, you have liveness issues, right? And the other issue with many of these rollups is around, let's say, the proving system, the security system, right, that makes those rollups secure. So, for example, if you look at, let's say, optimistic rollups in particular, you have these fraud-proof systems that have to be there, right? Otherwise, you don't know whether the sequencer that proposes a transaction, if that transaction is even valid or not. Optimism, which started with optimistic rollups, they didn't have fraud proofs for a very, very long time. Arbitrum that had fraud proofs, it was permissioned, which meant that if and only if you are part of a certain list of validators, and only then you can go and claim something went wrong in the certain rollup. Now imagine, now many of these rollup builders have actually released their stacks. So now you can go and spin up instances of Arbitrum designed and customized for different application use cases. So now everything kind of amplifies, right? So if you had previously had one rollup that, let's say, or two rollups that had centralized sequencer, now you have 10,000 rollups, all of them operating with centralized sequencers. And now, because you can't trust in the same way these app rollups, the way you trust Arbitrum, any of these rollups can go down, any of these rollups can do nasty stuff, and you have no way to prevent that, right? And so the question would be, hey, why don't, and the other thing is, even if people have access to, let's say, things like fraud proofs, they do not want to implement that in an app-specific context, because one, if you want to have a fraud-proof system, you need to have enough nodes that are going to watch that network and make sure that nothing bad happens, right? And that's very tricky, right? Because many of these app-specific systems do not have a network at all, right? You could say, hey, why don't you go and build a ZK rollup, right? But ZKs are not easy either, right? It's quite expensive. If you want to go and build a ZK rollup, your prover has to spend, I don't know, maybe $10,000 a month just to run the proving system. So that's not ideal. So what's the solution, right? The idea is, if you want to stick with optimistic rollup, why don't you use ZK fraud proofs in a much more on-demand way? So you do not go and generate proofs every single time for every single transaction, but actually generate proofs when they are required. And what I mean by required is, someone in the network can go and say, hey, something looks fishy. Can you go and produce me a proof for this last transaction that you committed? By the way, this is different from, let's say, an optimistic rollup model where basically you have this challenger, and that challenger goes and engages with the sequencer in this bisection protocol that's very communication heavy, and no one wants to do that. No one wants to implement that system, especially in app-specific context I'm talking about, right? And so this idea is where basically you take an optimistic rollup and you insert ZK proof in an on-demand way. So a challenger comes in and say, hey, this is the transaction, or this is the block of transaction that you submitted on the L1, and here's a commitment that you said, but it doesn't look like the state commitment is actually valid. And so can you produce me a proof that the last commitment is actually valid? And so the benefit of this system is, number one, you do not have to build an entire bisection protocol. You don't have to go through all the communication heavy stuff that comes with fraud proofs. It still remains optimistic, so you can still play your narrative game that it's still cheaper to do, because fraud proofs validity proofs are only generated when they are required, right? And we actually have an implementation for this as well. So if you want to chat about this, ping me around and we can chat. Thank you very much for your time.